All right, the time is now 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It looks like we can go ahead and get started. So again, thank you all so very much for joining us for the new realities of COVID-19 from a local agency's perspective. First, we want to go ahead and transition to the slide just to provide some overall housekeeping. One of the things we want to make sure is that at this time, you know that if you are hearing my voice, great, you've already dialed into the webinar, so awesome. But if you are seeing this page, and actually, David, if you want to just click one ahead. Awesome. So if you are seeing this page right here, essentially this just means that the organizer is speaking at this time, and if you cannot hear, just go ahead and use the information provided to you on the screen so you can actually dial into the webinar to hear the information that will be provided. Now, as a second quick housekeeping before turning it over to our lovely presenters, click to the next slide. I want to make sure that you know that there are two ways to engage within this webinar. One is the chat box. You'll see that there is a chat box. You just need to utilize the little arrow beside chat and or click on the question mark, and you will be able to type in your question to us throughout the entire webinar. My name is Simona Wright-James. I'll be the moderator for this webinar, so most certainly I will make sure to actively watch your questions and provide them to the presenters at the end when we open up for Q&A. And most certainly, if you are only listening to this webinar, you can email me your questions directly. And if your question wasn't answered during the webinar, we will make sure to get back to you immediately afterward. And now, without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our Vice President of Disaster Operations, Kimberly Berg.
Hi, everyone. This is Kim. I'm so happy that so many of you could join us today. We have about 300 people who have signed up for this webinar. So certainly the topic is very prevalent and it's something we're all interested in engaging. Our two speakers, David Aguilar and Hilma Meneses, both have great experience and they are experiencing everything that you are experiencing. I saw their slides earlier, and I can tell you that this is going to hit home for a lot of people. So I don't want to take much time. After David and Hilma present, we'll have 30 to 40 minutes for questions and discussion. And Simona has already provided information on how to access that after the presentation is done. Okay, David, would you like to start?
Okay, so I am going to run through what we have been through over the past few weeks, and literally I'm going to run through it. I want to give you a little bit of background about our agency, a little bit about the environment within which we are operating, but then you'll see a lot of words and a lot of slides. It's something I adopted for this presentation from some other material that I was preparing. My intent is to dwell on the operational changes, policies, processes, equipment, and deployment that we've been through. The first thing that I think is important to understand is that for our agency, we are like disaster central USA down here in the middle of southern South Louisiana. We have responded to oil spills, freezes, hurricanes, tornadoes, everything except for a train wreck. And for all I know, maybe we did before my time was here. But we have kind of an infrastructure that I think makes us ready to respond rapidly. We have what we call the red team, and it is the hub of all decisions that are made. And membership in both of these teams, the red team and the leadership team, really depend on how critical your role is in the agency. It's not necessarily by title. And we have a rhythm of meetings on every Thursday, a decision matrix of which items come to which team, a standard agenda format, and tools that we use to try to keep us operating in a really complicated environment, such as most Catholic Charities agencies are. And I would like to think that we are in a constant state of readiness, not just disaster preparedness. We have an incident command structure that we're ready to activate and change directions on a dime. For example, in 2016, we staffed up from 55 to about 225 within an 8-week period and opened up 2 operational centers for those floods that had inundated about half of our state. So as a little bit of background, as this thing got started, we were in the midst of Mardi Gras down here in South Louisiana, and it sort of peaks in that week of February 22nd through the 25th, and our office is at low staff during that. Most people are on holidays. We came back on March 3rd. For the most part, we had kind of returned to normal somewhat at that time. There was some background noise about cases in New York, and the Princess Cruise lines were going on. That Thursday, at our leadership team meeting, as the news began to mount, we changed what is our monthly brown bag lunches that were coming up on March 24th to be a COVID-ready type discussion where we would begin to make preparations to work from home. And we also decided that over the near term, we would start using MS Teams as a leadership team as a remote operation functionality, and we would immerse ourselves in that and begin to immerse the agency in it as well. That was Thursday morning at about 10 o'clock. By 7:30 that evening, as I saw news begin to develop, it was apparent to me we needed to be ready more rapidly than that. And so we scheduled a meeting for the very next day for COVID mobilization. We activated our incident command team, which was our red team plus 1 additional member who has a lot of experiences and skilled at operationalizing concepts and deploying disaster response. We decided we were going to invest in bringing in some new technology for everybody that needed it: laptops, cell phones, and this software called 3CX, which enables anybody's cell phone to function as a desk phone. And we wanted to get people set up and trained in MS Teams. By the next day, we were having cases in Louisiana going forward to Tuesday of that next week. We had a case in Louisiana. There were, by that Tuesday, we had 5 known cases statewide. The governor declared a state emergency the next day. By Friday, we had begun to implement a draft on temporary leave policies, and I'll mention that a little bit later. We had started to prepare continuity of operation plans, and there were 3 questions we had asked people to answer. Let me go back to this because I think I skipped through it a little too quickly. We on that Friday when we had our COVID preparation meeting, the COOP template was that everybody needed to have 3 levels of backup, descriptions of essential processes, and a plan for office closure and a plan for remote operations on their essential processes. It also needed to be written in such a way as that anybody could pick it up and read it. Anybody on the leadership team could pick it up and read it should we get to that level of people being impacted within our agency. So on that Friday, we reviewed the COOP plan or the plans. They were kind of inconsistent. Some people had used one format, some people had used a second format. So those needed to be rewritten, and we did that due for the next Monday. That Saturday, things began to pick up. There was a death in Louisiana. The number of known cases began to increase. When we came back on Monday into the office, the governor had closed the bars, had banned gatherings of 50 or more people. And so on that day, we issued that temporary leave policy that we had reviewed and had the first draft of on the preceding Friday. That temporary leave policy allows people to borrow against future accruals. There are 14 days of sick leave that they can borrow for an illness amongst them, for themselves or a family member. And then if they need to take time off for childcare, it's borrowing against the vacation time. We also have in that plan 30 days of paid administrative leave if we have to suspend operations. This is something we did in concert with the diocese. We felt it was really important that one of our first tasks is our responsibility to our own. If we start to lay off people and encounter furloughs, et cetera, then those people might very well end up at our doors as needing some of our services. We're trying to honor as much as we can and be as affordable as we can with keeping people employed. It's especially important for us because we just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and I want to keep my entire teams engaged. We decided right then that we were going to start phasing in our remote operations the very, very next day. And we were going to start with our leadership team meetings. It was going to be mandatory that people participate through MS Teams. And it was going to be, we wanted to move phones and payroll to remote. And we were going to do that despite the fact that our COOPs were incomplete. We felt like it was important to begin that movement because the rapidity with which events were happening, not only in our area, but as you followed them around across the country. So the next day, we've got cases in our area. We've got deaths. We started our phase in of remote operations. It went pretty well with our MS Teams meeting for the leadership team and the payroll, but we stumbled on the phones. Some of the technology and the training wasn't complete by then. We also started front door screening of a set of 4 or 5 questions and taking people's temperatures. Anything here, by the way, that is purple and underlined, I can make available afterwards for anybody to look at and use as you see fit. On that Tuesday, we also started getting inquiries from foundations who wanted to know what kind of needs were we hearing, what kind of resources might we need. The next few days, we really focused on training, on deploying the equipment that we had purchased, and then training. Some of our team members had never used laptops. The phone system was something new. Logging on and being able to use MS Teams was something new. And MS Teams, by the way, is a pretty good resource. You can share documents, audio, computers pretty easily with that. And then also on that day, we heard from the Governor's Office of Homeland Security. And that was, could we begin, or do we have the capabilities to assist with food preparation and delivery? Things began to escalate a little bit for us. The next day, we had to deal with someone who potentially had 3rd-degree exposure to knew someone who had been diagnosed with COVID. We had to make a decision, with the nervousness about this disease, with the uncertainty about how it is transmitted. We made a decision that we were going to move that day on Friday to full remote operations, probably about a day before we were really ready. And because of the incredible team that we have, we were able to do it with minimal disruption. So we went to full remote operations. We had, because of the work on the COOPs, processes established for mail. We bought a drop box to bolt to a front pillar in the front of our office. We have an online invoice approval process we've established, and very limited come into the office, very limited need to come into the office for check writing and deposits. We can do online behavioral health sessions. We can do online counseling for our immigration legal services. We moved some of the things that are essential, like the background screenings and fingerprinting for the reunification of unaccompanied minors. We want to reunite families as much as possible during this, and so we moved that into a more open area in the lobby. We are trying desperately to limit office access. People are having trouble, even me, adjusting to the fact that I can't go into the office. I shouldn't be going into the office. We moved, because we want to have online security, when you move a document from our system to your own computer at home to print, that's a breach in security. So when we have things with PII that need to be printed, we move the printer into the lobby so people can just come into the front office, into the lobby to print sensitive documents. We started wellness checks, especially outgoing calls for asylees, immigrants, refugees, and the elderly in our foster grandparent program. We also instituted safety precautions at our residential programs. Now these are not housing programs. These are residential programs for special populations, like men recently released from prison and homeless pregnant women. So we have additional safety precautions, a schedule of when and who is going to wipe down common areas. We're taking temperatures. and doing wellness checks with those populations. By that time too, I had been able to contact some people I know, some businessmen who own restaurants who've done us favors with feeding some of our populations and programs and providing meals. I'd contacted them. I'd start to put together a food preparation network, and then the potential for delivering that as well. At this time, when we were moving to a closed building, it became very important, I think, in how we reflected our activities and messaged that to the community. You know, in following the kind of guidelines of trauma-informed care, we tried to put that into practice. The first sign that was written for our front door said something to the effect of, "I'm sorry, but our building is closed until further notice. If you have any questions, please call this number." We moved to a different sign that's on our front door, and it's up in 2 languages, by the way. And instead of saying that, it says, "Welcome. We're here to help you. And because we're concerned about your safety, we are operating remotely. And that although our building is closed, we are still open, and most of our services are still available." Thanks to some of my senior staff, we were able to craft what I think is a much more appropriate and welcoming sign, consistent with who we are and what we're doing in the community right now. The next day, the cases began to mount in Baton Rouge because of some of the inquiries I had gotten earlier. We started to get some funding in. We started to get $25,000. We were notified of an award for $25,000 to use for asylees, immigrants, and refugees. And then to kind of emphasize trauma-informed care, I sent out an email asking people to be conscious of the words that they use. And that although our building is closed, that we are still open, and not just our services, but our hearts and our minds. And then I finished that email with a couple of tips from mental health first aid in how to talk to, questions to ask, and suggestions to make to people who are in the midst of a crisis. And this is really important. We are the first agency that a lot of the state and local governments turn to assist at times of disaster, and we're the first agency that a lot of the community comes knocking on the door of to find assistance and resources and instruction and help with the various applications and processes that the government sets up. By Sunday of this past week, or the current week, the governor had issued a statewide shelter in place. Social services are exempt for that, and then just in case, we have parish emergency passes. Parish, I mean by that, that's what we call our counties down here, that we can put in the windshields of our cars during situations of local emergencies that allow us to get into disaster-struck areas or be out and about during times of emergency. Then yesterday came, the number of cases is beginning to be known at a higher rate. The issues that we're dealing with are just basic needs. We're getting a lot of calls, people out of jobs, people either homeless or threatened with homelessness, and hunger. There is a huge fear within the immigration community of where to turn, how to get help, how can they get their basic needs met. And even the folks, the parents and the sponsors of unaccompanied children are fearful to come out, especially with the government shutdown. We're thinking about offering them a letter that they could take and keep on them. Now, it won't offer them guaranteed security, but it might help if any of them want to venture out to come and try to be reunified with their children. And then just today, the work that had begun just a few days ago in terms of having a network for food preparation and delivery, they are asking, I got a call from both Department of Education and GOSEP today, can that be activated tomorrow? And tomorrow they will be giving us a call to let us know what areas are needed, what geographic areas where the shortcomings are. One other thing, which real quickly turned into a baker's one other thing, I guess. Looking back over this really short period of time, our ability to respond and perform the way we did really goes out to just an exceptional team and teamwork and attention to details that my senior leadership and others provide at a time when I just say things like, let's go remote tomorrow. They know how to take that and implement it and make it be effective. And I'm really thankful for them. Some of the things I wish we would have done a little bit better is really understand the protocol for how to handle somebody who says yes to any of the screenings, and what exactly does exposure mean? Does a third degree exposure, is that really exposure? And we're learning right now that there's a difference between office closure and a community shutdown. We were moving to be prepared for an office closure, but not a community shutdown. That came a lot more quickly than we anticipated. And if it weren't for the work we had done to prepare for an office closure, we couldn't have done it within a day and be ready for a community shutdown. We need to do a better job of tracking the inquiries and needs and the calls that we get, not only by making outgoing calls, but by keeping track of those incoming calls. As we change systems, we kind of lost some of that. And so some of the phone calls that I'm getting and questions I'm getting from potential funders, I've got to get back to them with better data. And the data was very important in springing out that $25,000 that we got for immigrants. That was a conversation that had gone on for several days. And when I was able to get back to them with the results of our phone calls, that money came the next day. It's been very difficult to balance donor interests and board communication because we've all been so swamped with writing policies, communicating with one another, learning new processes, learning new tools. It's something that I got to get better at. When I go out and I've done some deployments with other agencies, there's always a stumbling that agencies go through when you make the switch to a disaster. And it really is a switch that you have to turn off or on and realize that normal operations are not going to continue and you need to focus on the disaster. We are having trouble making that switch. I've noticed in some of the plans that there's an overabundance and an over-reliance on being able to come into the office. People need to stay out of the office for their own safety. And every disaster is different. You say that, every disaster is unique. But this time, it really, really is different. So I'm going to pause there. Hilma's going to follow up. She's a couple of weeks advanced from us in responding to this. She's going to talk some about how they are dealing with this reality of a community shutdown and how they're maintaining operations and some of the other issues that they got to deal with. Hilma?
Thank you, everyone, and I appreciate everyone's time today. David, you did an excellent job accounting for what has happened in the last several weeks, and much of our preparation has been very, very similar, including also having an incident command. What we did early, we're still doing. One of the very first things we did with our incident command was to get as much education as possible about the pandemic, and we continue to educate ourselves on a daily basis, including today, on what is happening with the pandemic so that we know how to react or take action. For example, one of the training opportunities for us, in addition to getting FEMA training early on, but one of the training opportunities that we utilize every day is the Johns Hopkins University tracking map. And that's very, very useful because for us, it's been very, very useful because we were able to predict more or less when San Francisco or California was likely to shut down. And if you look at that map, for example, as of approximately an hour ago is when I saw it last, the United States was the third largest in volume of cases with about almost 50,000. It was 49,768. Anyway, those numbers are important for us. It also tracks it by state. For us, that's been very important to know what we need to do next. Like David, our incident command is comprised of several people that are we also meet on a daily basis, and every day each of the officers either recommends or discusses with the incident command their recommendations, and then they implement it. And as a group, we make the decisions as to what needs to happen. For example, our communications officer is charged with communicating internally and externally as much as possible, if possible every day, sometimes several times a day, including today, and in communication going out to our leadership, to our staff, to our board, We're our partners, such as the City of San Francisco and other jurisdictions. And by the way, we serve people in 3 counties, San Mateo, Marin, and San Francisco counties. And we have about 35,000 clients on the normal day. And we have approximately 600 employees, 32 programs, some very essential programs and some less essential, and I'll discuss what that means. But anyway, the communications officer, even to this day, today, is communicating with our partners, including our faith-based organizations in town and other nonprofits, because they are our partners. When there is something that our community needs that we can't deliver, our partners might be able to deliver, or vice versa. So we're in constant communication with them. We have at least twice a week conversations with the City of San Francisco, for example, on a webinar very similar to this. Our financial officer, which is also part of the incident command, that is projecting our financial impact on a daily basis. So for example, we have a lot of essential programs and non-essential programs. Our non-essential programs that we closed earlier when we were predicting that we were going to need social distancing even prior to the shutdown, consisted of our CYO athletics division, our CYO camp, which is in Occidental, actually in Sonoma County, and our CYO transportation. Right, we started closing them down right before all of the school districts closed down. Those are our revenue generating programs that subsidize our essential programs. So closing them down, we knew was going to be a tremendous financial hit for us and put us in a deficit potentially. Anyway, for that reason, we had to, our financial officer is tracking expenses, is tracking where we are financially, and continues to this day and every day. She's also at the moment looking at lines of credit and the small business loans that the administration is talking about and so forth. By the way, Catholic Charities USA's email blast about asking congressional leaders to pass a bill that would allow nonprofits to receive some relief in addition to what they've already decided on corporations is very helpful. I sent that out to all of our constituents, all of our board members in the last several days, and I urge the rest of you to do the same, because like us, you might have some revenue generating programs that will not be able to subsidize your essential programs in the future. So that financial planning for your longevity and sustainability is going to be very, very important. Anyway, the financial officer is tracking that for us, reports out, and then together we make decisions. Our logistics and supply officers, from the very day we started this, and we started our incident command about a week or so before David did. Anyway, we've been monitoring our supplies from several weeks back to the present. We monitor every day on what is missing, what is needed. Some of our essential programs are, for example, the residential care facility for the chronically ill. These are chronically ill people that are HIV positive and otherwise homeless. And we're not going to abandon them. The essential workers are in that facility are like health workers. In fact, some of them are health workers. That was for me one of the largest priorities, because those people in that facility are the most vulnerable in our community, frankly, of getting the virus and dying. And so it was very important that our logistics and supply officers worked really closely with the program officers of those programs to make sure that they had food supplies, food security, and food chain for several weeks. And it doesn't mean that we needed 6 weeks or more worth of inventory on site, but it certainly meant that we also had to connect again to our nonprofit agencies that could deliver food, or programs throughout the community that in case we needed them to deliver food to us, they would. So we've done that. In addition to that, we have other residential care facilities, one in San Rafael for at-risk boys who have been abused. They're under our care. Similarly to the chronically ill population, we can't leave those boys by themselves. So obviously, again, food security and education security as well for them was very important. And we've been planning every day, and each day we assess what is needed, what do we need to bring in. Of course, protective gear at the residential care facilities is critical. Similarly, for our like David has done for our remote employees, and all of our headquarters now, I call it the main office, are working remotely. We had been planning for, like David has done, we had been planning for additional office supplies and laptops for our respective employees, especially those running payroll, running checks and so on. We have the mechanisms now that are remote for the most part. There's a few things, printing checks we still do at the office, so we do have an employee, and we were really lucky. We have one of the employee who was printing our checks doesn't live very far from the office, and she is one of, I think, 3 people in the entire building that gets to work at the building. But anyway, we were very lucky with her. But if she had not been available, we would have established a remote printing location. Our securities officer, again, from the day one, has been very, very helpful in recommending and discussing the protocols of security and then implementing them. Everything from the signs about hand washing and social distancing, et cetera, to the visitor policy and so forth. And the event cancellations as well. You know, that's early on, we weren't sure if we were going to cancel our event coming up. That was going to be in May. Now it's canceled. At one point, you know, the security officer recommended it's time to cancel, so we did. And by the way, for those who have events coming up or thought they had events coming up, look at your contracts with your respective hotels, because usually most of those contracts have a force majeure clause. And we instituted ours. They wanted to keep all of our deposits, and I said, no, you have a force majeure clause there, and we're so anyway, they understand now that they can't keep their deposit as a result of that clause. The personnel officer, again, also very important, and he is very, very critical along with our communications officer to communicate to our employees. That is so important. The employees right now are fearful, and as we progress with this pandemic, they've become even more fearful. They're fearful of getting the virus. They're fearful that their families are going to get sick. They're fearful of losing their jobs, and so on. And so we tried to communicate as much as possible, try to put them at ease as much as I can. I did a webinar just a few days ago. I'm not on a virtual town hall a few days ago, and my plan is to do that repeatedly. But we too have MS Teams, and we have Workplace. MS Teams, as David said, is an exceptional tool, and we've been using that in the incident command, and we've been using Workplace to communicate. Workplace is it's a Facebook product that is internal. So in addition to email, we consistently communicate now with our workforce through Workplace, and sometimes in other ways as well. Some employees are less IT savvy, and so like David, we have encouraged them to learn how to use systems, if anything, so that they can maintain informed and educated on what's going on. Right now, our essential workers are the ones who are at most risk. First of all, it is in City of San Francisco right now, it's a crime to be on the street. And just in the first few days after the ban came to us, 2 of our essential workers got stopped by the police. And luckily, we had given them a letter signed by Catholic Charities saying that they were essential workers and were on their way to work. They were allowed to be on the street so that they could get to their essential worker, to their facility. I would encourage everyone who has essential workers who are going to one of your facilities to have a letter like that in their possession, possibly with their employer ID, so that if they get stopped in a shelter-in-place community, that they have proof. Essential workers right now continue to it's mandated that they monitor their temperature on a daily basis. They have to practice overall health precautions if anyone is getting, just like they did earlier, but more even critical now, is if they have any symptoms whatsoever, they're mandated to go home, or if they've been exposed, obviously they're mandated to go home. And we have protocols that if somebody were to report that they are with a virus what we would do. And the very first thing we would do is contact the public health department, obviously, and get direction from them. As one of the first points of protocol is to contact them. Similarly, we have protocols now that if one of our clients gets sick that is living at one of our facilities, that we would have a chain of communication with various entities, including the public health department and family or relatives of those individuals if they have any, and quarantine measures and so forth. The staffing decisions continue to evolve on a daily basis. We have put a lot of people on furlough. About 66 to 76 people are on furlough, and we decided that given the fact that our revenue generating programs are no longer, we had to do this a little differently than maybe others would. For furloughs, they're going to use their sick leave and their vacation, and then they're going to go on unpaid leave, or they're going to get laid off unless they are on a contract with the city, in a contracted program with the city of San Francisco. City of San Francisco has allowed reimbursements to our employees who are furloughed in lieu of laying them off, because they want to hopefully bring them back as soon as we reopen some of those programs that we've closed down. We have several programs that we've had to close down. Our after school care facilities for children. Families ended up wanting to have their kids stay home with them instead of bringing them to the facility. Development care, child care center as well. We were initially going to keep that open, but the census started to be so low that it was better to close it. But anyway, and so as we monitor our finances right now, we are also contacting all of our funders. We're about to, we started our online blast a week ago to our donors and letting them know that we need their help and it's urgent now. We are calling all of our foundations and letting them know the same. Several foundations have responded, and at least one foundation wants us to be a lead agency for services directly to people who are been affected by the virus in a financial way and in other ways. So we're going to be providing financial help and food security, hopefully, to some of those individuals who come to us, and it will be funded by this particular agent's foundation. Anyway, that's in a nutshell what we're doing right now. And like all of you, our essential workers are amazing saints, I call them, but they're only going to last so long. So all of us have 4 points of succession, including our essential workers, in case they get sick or in case they can't work. We have plans as to who's coming after them, and hopefully our furlough and if we have layoffs, our laid off employees will be on lists to return to work to help take over some of the work that our essential workers can no longer do if indeed they get too exhausted, or if indeed they get sick or are exposed in some way. So with that, I think that gives you a good summary. Let me know if you have questions.
Thank you so very much. Yes, I think you provided so much just good information, and definitely the questions have been rolling in pretty continuously throughout the entire presentation. Before we get to Q&A though, I do want to turn it back over to Kim to provide just some more informational resources to everyone that's on this webinar today.
Yes, thank you, Simona. So absolutely. I mean, I think both David and Hilma certainly laid out a lot of information. I do want to just remind agencies that you can qualify for a $10,000 COVID-19 disaster grant. If it is one grant per diocese for this disaster, because every agency is affected. But certainly, if you'd like to access the application for that, then please, you can go to the members page and access the application there, or contact myself or one of the staff here in disaster operations, and we'll send one to you right away. Simona, I'm going to turn it back to you for some of the questions we've received.
Absolutely. So one of the first questions that was asked, and I believe it's more so geared toward Helma, you had shared in terms of like being able to access protective gear. If you're able to just share any insight about how you're able to do this, and then also speak to a little bit in terms of like if someone is an essential worker, should an agency look to mandate the use of protective gear?
We were able to, because we had a logistics and supply officer on our incident command early on and still do, we were able to secure some inventory around masks and other types of gear. Maybe not enough at the end because we're not yet at the peak of this virus, but we still have a supply, and we are buying some more protective gear from a wholesaler as well. That I think is very crucial. I didn't talk about our senior programs that are still open, by the way, and how we're visiting seniors. Instead of bringing them to our site, we're visiting them at their homes. And so quite often, if not always, we should be wearing protective gear when we visit the seniors, because those are a very, very vulnerable population. And we visit them to deliver food supplies or other types of supplies that they might need, including medication that they need delivered as well if necessary. So does that answer your question?
No, absolutely. It certainly does, just in terms of like how you were able to, it totally makes sense in terms of how you were able to access that gear. I appreciate you for sharing that. Kind of piggyback. Okay.
Sorry, that you asked, when do we mandate?
Well, the second part to that question was more over if a person is an essential worker, should they mandate the use of protective gear in you know, whether it be working with seniors or any other population, should that be an across the board rule?
Yeah, and again, it depends on their role and who the clients are and so forth. But at our residential care facilities for the chronically ill, we're not mandating that the essential workers put on their masks at all times, but they have most of the time. They do most of the time. And when we go out, we have another group that goes out to work with the homeless on the streets and transport them to shelters. Right now, MUNI, the San Francisco Transportation Agency, and BART are limited in their routes. And so we have the city of we volunteered actually with the city to the city of San Francisco to transport some of the folks into shelters. And our workers, obviously our drivers, should be wearing masks. And so it does depend on the groups that we are working with.
Thank you, Helma. We appreciate you for responding to that question. David, the next question I would like to throw to you, and it's kind of loaded, so sorry in advance, but someone was asking, or they remembered you mentioning something about food delivery. And as it relates to food delivery, can you just share a little bit in terms of where and how you were able to determine where those routes, whether food should be delivered, or anything about what it looked like, particularly if you didn't use staff or if you use volunteers? If you can just speak anything to that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, we are ready to go when we find out more from the state. They are trying to identify the areas of need in our community. We haven't gotten that word yet. I will say this, one of the things that they attracted them to turn to us was the fact that we have very extensive background checks because of all the systems as part of the Catholic Church that we have in place. So anybody we put out on the road, we know has had very deep background checks before they would go out to people's homes, et cetera. That's not something I will probably mandate for employees. I think I'll look for volunteers. And we too have a small supply of protective gear that we can distribute for those workers. But we don't have a sense of where the need is like like the state does, who is doing inventory right now across the state in terms of trying to find out where those shortages are.
All right. It looks like we have a question here as it relates to any guidance either of you can provide to shelter programs as it relates to the day-to-day operations in light of COVID-19 outbreak.
I can respond to that. So yes, we have family shelters, and similarly to the workplace security precautions that we've been learning about from the early onset of this problem, we communicate that with our families, from social distancing to hand washing to more intense cleaning of the facility, obviously, and if anyone were to get sick, similar protocols. That's constant. And right now with shelter in place, again, they're not supposed to go out. They have to maintain inside. And we have our essential workers, again, going through in different shifts, coming through the facility, practicing extra carefully all of the precautions of food preparation and distribution at the facility is very, very critical as well. And we have one facility where family or elders live in the facility, and they used to come to a main area to collect food. You know, the way in which we distribute their food now is very different. So that's not exactly a family shelter, but it's very close. So we're distributing food very differently to them as well. You just have to take the extra precautions, but and more importantly for the family shelters or other shelters too, I would say we have to have that succession planning in case our essential workers get sick. We got to have or get too tired. You know, we got to have backup plans and staffing to take over their place.
Thank you so much for responding to that question, Hilma. Again, we just have a few more, but so there's some conversation, and I'm looking at quite a few questions that have come in just around any advice or best practices that you can give when delivering in-kind aid. It seems, especially in light of where we are today, especially in light of the fact that we may not be seeing clients face to face. So any suggestions or best practices as it relates to how they can actually deliver that in-kind assistance would be helpful.
Yeah, I can take that. So again, it depends on what kind of in-kind aid, right? If, for example, we also have an immigration program and we're communicating with our clients either by telephone or video conferencing. And during those calls, we might say, do you have enough food? Do you have whatever you need to survive and so on, or do you need assistance in some other way? And there are ways to get those things to them that have been donated, for example, gift cards or whatever more, or clothes and so on. If we can't, we would try to deliver them or to mail them, depending on what it is. But we have to prioritize about what's most essential, most critical for survival, and food security being at the very top of the list, right? If we know that an undocumented individual, for example, has need for food security, we will find a way to get it to them. Or if they have other needs of other types of clothes or whatever, we'll figure out a way to get them through our drivers who in our transportation division or our program managers. But prioritization is really key.
We've talked to a medical person who's got more knowledge about this than I do, and her suggestion was that we are going to ask our screening questions of anybody before we even go to their house or near their house, and depending upon those questions, that will dictate the level of protection in terms of gloves, face masks, going to the front door or leaving things on the sidewalk, that kind of thing. There's just so much uncertainty about how this virus is transmitted, how long it stays on surfaces, that we're going to be extra cautious.
No, absolutely. Thank you both for responding to that. That was very helpful. Just providing that sense of, insight in terms of what what are the options available, and just, really bring into light, the prioritization in terms of what things are delivered and not delivered. Helma, I have another question for you. Someone's wanting to know, could you speak a bit more about the programs or enterprises that generated income but are shut down? Specifically, if you have sought out thus far any type of funding or income generating operations, what type of help, if any, would you be able to provide as it relates to this piece of, just because cash right now is such a, it's so critical in terms of delivering services. So if you can speak to that question, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, so some of our revenue generating programs, like I mentioned, we included CYO Camp up in Occidental. So we have 300 acres. We have a beautiful facility with cabins. So we said to the city of San Francisco, we had to furlough everybody because there's no kids are going to go up there at this time with the schools shut down and so forth. And anyway, we said to the city of San Francisco, we could use, if you want, and Sonoma County but as well, if they want to use our facility as a quarantine shelter for people who have tested positive, that we are obviously interested in allowing that to happen. And of course, they would reimburse us for some of the costs. That would help. The city of San Francisco was very interested. Right now, they're putting it on hold. Sonoma is talking about it, so that's an opportunity there. The other opportunity is doing services such as delivery of food. We weren't exactly delivering food to communities other than our own clients in the past, but now that clientele has grown, right? And so we said to the city of San Francisco, and we'd be happy, and to others in the peninsula, we'd be happy to partner with you if you have funding to deliver food. And similarly, the transporting people to homeless individuals to shelters. The city of San Francisco just gave us a contract for that. So some of our costs will be covered, or most of our costs for that program now will be covered. That's not necessarily generating income for the rest of the agency, but it's potentially employing someone who would otherwise be laid off or furloughed.
I would add to that all of us have processes and products and services that could probably ready adapt to this situation. When funding starts coming down from the federal government through the states and the local governments, if you have, for example, like EFSP, if you have processes for screening truly deserving people for unemployment, food, utilities, rent, that kind of thing, start letting those folks know. Go to your mayor's office of Homeland Security, your governor's office of Homeland Security, Department of Health, whatever those agencies in your state that usually funnel these kinds of monies, Office of Community Development. Let them know what your capacities are, what your processes are, who your people are, because they will be looking for agencies to help get these funds and these services out into the local communities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David, for responding to that question. Likewise, Helma, thank you so much for responding to that question. I do want to just quickly share before jumping to another question. Sarah was able to just share that from the perspective of Catholic Charities Odessa, they are in fact distributing prepackaged boxes of food through the curbside pickup only method. And what they've done is they are using 6 feet markers alongside the sidewalk with the first line 6 feet away from the staff desk. And all staff in their agency are utilizing masks and gloves as a method to still deliver that in-kind, critical need, but at the same time, keeping, the social distancing apart from one another. So thank you so much, Sarah, for just sharing that with us. All right, at this point, I do want to transition to see if we can just go to a question that's a little bit different, and this is from a different angle of it, but of funding. But One person would like to know if you have any advice in terms of how to notify their grant funders about COVID-19 changes to programming, and possibly needing to make budget changes. So again, either of you, if you wouldn't mind just sharing some insight there.
What we have done is we're sending physical letters, we're sending emails, we're calling. And if there's another method of communication, we will do that as well. We have to try everything. And even if there are foundations or grantors that we're not necessarily planning to issue new grants at this time, but I think that now everybody's open for the possibility of distributing funds. I would hope. And so I personally, I'm just contacting them all with my staff through all those messages, email, as well as a physical letter and phone calls.
Yeah, I would say that every, depending upon your relationships, every foundation, donor, granting agency has its own peculiarities, and do everything. I think it's really important that you communicate at this time.
All right, awesome. Again, thank you both so very much just for making yourselves available to share, some of the things that you've seen, best practices and lessons learned during these very uncertain times. We appreciate it. Please know for anyone who provided a question and we did not get to it on this webinar, again, we will do our best to respond to your question via email. Many of you had questions about whether the PowerPoint deck will be shared. It will. As will the recording from this session. You will be provided a YouTube link, again, no later than tomorrow morning, where you will be able to access and share this recording out with others. Also within that email, we will look to get some of those resources that David mentioned and Helma mentioned to you, so you can be able to use it, so you are not necessarily starting from scratch. But again, thank you all so very much for being available. This pretty much wraps up our webinar at this point. And please, everyone, stay healthy and stay safe.